The massive alien ship appeared on a quiet Tuesday morning, casting a shadow over the United Nations building in New York. Its sleek, metallic surface reflected the sunlight like polished chrome, making it impossible to ignore. Within hours, every news channel worldwide showed the same images: Earth's first contact with an advanced alien civilization. Dr. James Walker stood among the crowd of scientists and government officials gathered in the UN's main assembly hall. At 45, with graying hair and tired eyes, he didn't look like someone who would witness one of humanity's most important moments. As Earth's leading expert in evolutionary genetics, he had been called in to observe the meeting. The aliens called themselves the Collective. When they emerged from their ship, everyone gasped. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies rippling with muscle beneath their silvery skin. Their movements were graceful despite their size, and their four-fingered hands moved with incredible precision. The lead alien, who introduced himself as the High Commander, spoke perfect English through what appeared to be a translation device. "We have come to welcome humanity into the galactic community," he announced, his voice deep and resonant. But something in his tone made Dr. Walker uncomfortable. He noticed the slight curl of the alien's lip, the way their eyes moved across the human delegation, with what could only be described as disdain. During the initial presentations, Earth's representatives shared humanity's achievements: our art, our technology, our ability to adapt and survive in various environments. The High Commander listened politely, but Walker caught several of the alien delegates exchanging what appeared to be amused glances. Finally, one of the younger alien delegates couldn't contain himself. "Fascinating," he said, interrupting Earth's chief diplomat. "You accomplish so much despite your limitations." "Limitations?" asked the diplomat. The High Commander shot his subordinate a warning look, but the younger alien continued. "Your species is remarkably fragile. Your muscles are weak compared to any civilized race. Your bones break easily. You tire quickly. Your lifespans are tragically short. Even your DNA is unstable, prone to random mutations." Dr. Walker stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding protocol. "Our DNA's ability to mutate is actually one of our greatest strengths. It allows us to adapt." The alien delegation burst into what could only be described as laughter. The sound was musical but cruel, like wind chimes in a storm. "Adapt." The High Commander's tone was gentler than his colleagues, but no less condescending. "We have achieved physical perfection through careful genetic engineering. Our bodies are stronger, faster, and more durable than anything natural evolution could produce. We do not need to adapt." As if to demonstrate, one of the aliens casually lifted a solid metal conference table with one hand. Another delegate moved so fast that human eyes could barely track him, crossing the large room in a fraction of a second. Dr. Walker watched carefully, his trained eye noting something odd about their movements. Yes, they were impressive, but they were all identical. Every alien moved the same way, their muscles flexing in perfect unison. It reminded him of machines, programmed to perfection but lacking variation. The meeting continued for hours, with the aliens outlining their proposal for Earth to join their federation. But with each passing moment, their true attitude became clearer. They didn't see humans as equals. To them, we were primitive creatures barely worth noticing. As the day ended, Walker lingered in the empty conference room, examining a glass the High Commander had used. Under the pretense of cleaning up, he carefully preserved it for later study. Something about their claims of perfection bothered him. In his decades of research, he had never encountered a truly perfect organism. Life itself thrived on change, on the ability to adapt to new challenges. Looking out the window at the alien ship gleaming in the setting sun, Walker couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's greatest weakness, our imperfection, might just prove to be our greatest strength. But first, he needed to understand exactly what made these perfect beings tick. In his pocket, the sealed container with the High Commander's DNA sample felt like it weighed a ton. Sometimes, he thought, The biggest discoveries start with the smallest samples. 3 days after the first contact, Dr. Walker sat in his underground laboratory, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. The DNA sample from the High Commander revealed something extraordinary. Their genetic code was perfectly arranged, like a computer program without a single error. Too perfect. His discovery would have to wait, though. The emergency broadcast system interrupted his work, announcing a worldwide message from the collective. The High Commander's face appeared on screens across the globe. "People of Earth," he began, his expression neutral but his eyes holding a hint of amusement. "We have observed your civilization long enough to make a decision regarding your status in the galactic community." Walker watched from his lab, his hands clenching into fists as the alien continued. "Your species is clearly in need of guidance. However, we believe in giving even the most primitive species a chance to prove their worth." The High Commander's lips curved into what might have been a smile. "We propose a series of trials. Prove yourselves capable, and you may join us as equals. Fail, and Earth will become a protected colony under our supervision." The terms were simple but harsh. Humans would need to establish successful colonies on 3 different planets within 1 Earth year. Each planet would present unique challenges: high gravity, extreme temperatures, and toxic atmospheres, conditions that the collective claimed their perfect bodies could easily handle. In the following days, as governments scrambled to respond, Dr. Walker worked tirelessly in his lab. He had gathered more genetic samples from different members of the collective, and each told the same story. Their DNA showed signs of extensive engineering, but also something troubling. Their genetic code couldn't naturally adapt to new conditions. During an emergency United Nations session, Walker finally shared his findings. "They're not evolved," he explained to the room full of world leaders. "They're manufactured. Their genes are fixed in place, unchangeable. They survive harsh conditions through engineered resilience, not adaptation." "How does this help us?" asked the Secretary General, looking tired and worried. "Because we're different," Walker replied, pulling up a new set of data. "I've been studying DNA samples from our space station crews and early Mars settlers. Our genes are already showing subtle changes, adapting to space conditions. We may be weaker now, but we can become stronger. We can evolve." The room erupted in debate, but in the end, Earth had no choice. They accepted the challenge. The alternative was immediate submission to collective rule. Teams were quickly assembled. The best scientists, engineers, and colonists Earth had to offer. Walker insisted on going with the first group, heading to a high-gravity planet the collective called the Crusher. As they prepared for departure, the High Commander visited the launch facility. "Your determination is admirable," he said, watching humans load their ships. "But surely you understand the futility of this effort. The gravity alone on the Crusher would break your bones." Walker looked up at the alien leader, remembering the perfect, unchanging DNA he'd studied. "Maybe," he replied. "But breaking is how humans learn to be stronger." The High Commander's translator must have struggled with the concept because he merely shook his head and walked away. Later that night, as the first colony ships prepared for launch, Walker made one final check of his equipment. Among his scientific gear was something special, a new device he'd created to track genetic changes in the colonists in real time. The collective would be watching for signs of technology, weapons, or tools that might help humans survive. But they wouldn't think to look for changes in our own bodies. As the countdown began, Walker looked through the ship's window at Earth below. The collective's massive ships hung in orbit like silver clouds, watching. They expected to see humanity fail, to prove their point about our weakness. Walker smiled. They were about to learn an important lesson about the power of imperfection. 1 month into the colony mission on the Crusher, Dr. Walker's hands trembled as he looked at the latest test results. He wasn't shaking from the planet's crushing gravity. Though at 1.8 times Earth's gravity, every movement felt like walking through deep water. No, his hands shook from excitement. "Run the tests again," he told his assistant, Rob, who had dark circles under his eyes from the constant pressure. They worked in the colony's small medical lab, surrounded by humming machines and glowing screens. The results came back the same. The colonists' bodies were changing. It started with small things. Their leg muscles grew denser. Their bones showed increased calcium deposits. Even their heart muscles were adapting, becoming stronger to pump blood more efficiently in the high gravity. "Look at this," Walker said, pointing to a DNA scan from one of the younger colonists. "The gene expressions for muscle growth and bone density are shifting. We're not just getting stronger through exercise. Our bodies are actually rewriting themselves." Rob leaned closer, wincing as he moved. "The collective's monthly inspection is tomorrow. Should we tell them?" Walker shook his head. "Not yet. Let them keep thinking we're barely surviving. We need more time." The next day, 3 collective observers arrived in their environmental suits, though they hardly needed them. They walked easily despite the crushing gravity, their engineered bodies unaffected. "Still alive, I see," the lead observer said, scanning the colony's main dome. "Though you look strained." Walker played his part, moving slowly and acting more exhausted than he felt. "We're managing," he said between carefully measured breaths. The observers toured the colony, making notes and barely hiding their amusement at the humans' apparent struggles. They didn't notice how the colonists who had been there longest moved with slightly more ease, or how their posture remained straighter under the weight of the gravity. After the observers left, Walker called an emergency meeting in the colony's main hall. 50 colonists gathered, all showing signs of the same changes. "Our bodies are doing exactly what they're supposed to do," he explained, showing them the data. "We're adapting. Every cell in our bodies is learning, changing, becoming stronger. The collective thinks we're using technology to survive here. They don't understand that we're using something much more powerful, our own evolution." One of the colonists, a young man who had been among the first to arrive, stood up straighter than should have been possible in the crushing gravity. "I can feel it," he said. "Last week I could barely lift the construction materials. Now it's getting easier." Reports from the other colonies were equally promising. On the ice planet, humans were developing more efficient blood circulation and slightly denser body hair. In the toxic atmosphere of the Third World, subtle changes in lung tissue were helping colonists process the filtered air more effectively. But the most surprising changes came from the children. 2 babies had been born on the crusher during the first month. Their development was unlike anything Walker had seen before. Their bones were naturally denser, their muscles more efficient from the moment of birth. "This is what the collective doesn't understand," Walker said to his team as they reviewed the data. "They engineered themselves into a corner. They're strong, yes. Fast, certainly. But they're frozen. We're like water. We flow, we adapt, we change. They're like crystals. Perfect, but brittle and unchanging." That night, after encrypting his latest findings and sending them back to Earth, Walker stood at the dome's observation window. The heavy, purple-tinged clouds of the crusher rolled by outside, and he could feel the incredible gravity trying to pull him down. But he stood straight and smiled. Let the collective think they were watching humans struggle to survive. They didn't realize they were actually watching humanity take its next evolutionary step. In his pocket, he carried a small device showing the latest genetic scans from the newborns. Those babies would grow up stronger than any human in Earth's history. And they were just the beginning. The real question was, what would the collective do when they finally realized what was happening? 3 months had passed since the colonies began, and the changes were becoming harder to hide. Dr. Walker stood in his lab on the crusher, watching through a window as colonists moved heavy construction equipment with surprising ease. The collected surveillance drones hovered overhead, recording everything but understanding nothing. "They think we're using mechanical assistance," Walker said to Rob, who now stood as straight as he had on Earth, despite the crushing gravity. "They're looking for hidden technology, not biological changes." The colony had grown significantly. New buildings rose from the purple soil, their foundations deep and strong. But more impressive were the people themselves. The original colonists now moved with a natural grace that would have been impossible 3 months ago. Their bodies had changed, denser muscles, stronger bones, more efficient hearts and lungs. A message flashed on Walker's computer. It was from Captain Mark West, leader of the Ice World colony. The video showed people working outside in temperatures that should have been unbearable, even with their protective suits. "The cold doesn't bite like it used to," West reported, his breath barely visible in the freezing air. "Our bodies are generating heat more efficiently. And look at this." He held up a scan of a colonist's skin cells. "We're developing additional layers of fat cells, but they're different from normal fat. More like what you'd see in Arctic animals." Similar reports came from the toxic atmosphere colony. Their bodies were developing improved ways to process the filtered air, and their lung capacity had increased by 30%. But it was the children who showed the most dramatic changes. The babies born on the crusher were now crawling, their movements natural and easy in the high gravity. On the ice world, infants maintained higher body temperatures than their parents. In the toxic atmosphere colony, newborns showed enhanced lung development from their first breath. Walker compiled all this data carefully, encrypting it before sending it back to Earth. The collective still monitored all communications, but they were looking for signs of technological cheating, not biological data they assumed would show human weakness. During the monthly inspection, Walker noticed something new in the collective observers' behavior: confusion. They couldn't understand why the humans weren't struggling more. "Your people seem less distressed than expected," the lead observer said, watching colonists carry heavy loads across the compound. Walker shrugged. "We adapt," he said simply. The observer's expression showed he took this to mean humans were merely getting used to their difficulties, not actually changing to overcome them. Their own perfect, unchanging bodies had made them blind to the possibility of real biological adaptation. Later that day, Walker received an urgent message from Earth. The genetics team there had made a breakthrough in understanding the collective's DNA. "Their genetic engineering is based on a flawed assumption," the head researcher explained. "They thought perfection meant reaching an end state and staying there. But life doesn't work that way. Life is constant change, constant adaptation. They engineered themselves into an evolutionary dead end." Walker looked out at the colony, where the second generation of children born on the crusher were starting to show even more pronounced adaptations than the first. Some had been born with bone densities that would have been impossible on Earth, and muscle fiber structures that seemed perfectly suited to the high gravity. "How long until they notice?" Rob asked, standing beside him. "They'll have to eventually," Walker replied. "The question is whether they'll understand what it means." A group of children ran past the window, playing a game of tag. Their movements were swift and sure, unhampered by gravity that would have crippled their parents just months ago. Above them, the collective's drones continued their surveillance, still searching for non-existent technology that would explain human survival. Walker smiled. The collective had created perfect beings, unchanging and eternal. But in doing so, they had forgotten the most important lesson of life itself. Perfection isn't a destination. It's a journey, and humanity was on that journey, one adaptation at a time. The alarm blared through all 3 colonies simultaneously. On the main screens, massive solar flares erupted from the local star, sending waves of deadly radiation toward the planets. Dr. Walker rushed to the colony's control center on the crusher, where emergency reports were flooding in. "The radiation shielding won't hold against this," Rob said, his face lit by the red warning lights. "Not for long." The collective's response came quickly. Their massive ships began pulling away from the colonies, retreating to a safe distance. The High Commander's message was brief. "We regret that we cannot risk our vessels. You have 1 hour to evacuate to our designated safe zones. Those who cannot reach them will be unfortunate losses." But evacuation wasn't possible. The radiation would hit long before they could move everyone, especially the children. The collective had chosen these planets specifically because they were harsh and dangerous. Now they were about to become deadly. "They're leaving us to die," someone whispered in the control room. Walker stood up, his movements sure and steady despite the crushing gravity. "No," he said firmly. "They're giving us the perfect chance to show what humans can really do." He quickly connected with the other colony leaders. Captain West from the Ice World and Commander Lissa Hall from the Toxic Atmosphere Colony appeared on the screen, their faces grim but determined. "Our bodies have been adapting not just to the obvious challenges," Walker explained rapidly. "I've been tracking changes in our cellular structure. Our DNA repair mechanisms have been getting stronger, especially in those born here. We might be able to survive this." "Might?" Commander Hall asked. "Better than certain death trying to evacuate," Walker replied. "And better than surrendering to the collective's protection." The decision was made. They would stay and face the solar storm. As the radiation hit, the colonies went into lockdown. Hours passed like years. The collected ships watched from a safe distance, their sensors no doubt recording what they expected to be humanity's final moments. But something extraordinary happened. While the first hours were brutal, with many colonists becoming sick, their bodies began to respond. The enhanced DNA repair mechanisms kicked in, working faster than normal human biology should have allowed. Children born on the colony showed even stronger resistance. In the medical bay, Walker worked tirelessly, documenting everything. The radiation was causing damage, yes, but their cells were adapting, learning, changing in real time. What should have been lethal was becoming survivable. 24 hours later, when the solar storm finally passed, the collective ships returned, probably expecting to find only corpses. Instead, they found the colony still functioning. Humans were sick, yes. Weakened, certainly, but alive, surviving, and most importantly, changing. Walker greeted the emergency response team from the collective, who came in their fully sealed radiation suits. The aliens stopped short when they saw him standing there, his body showing signs of radiation exposure, but very much alive. "Impossible," the lead responder said, checking his instruments. The radiation levels were beyond survivable limits. Walker handed them a data pad containing medical scans of the colonists. "Survivable limits for whom?" he asked quietly. The collective scientists gathered around the pad, their expressions moving from disbelief to shock as they reviewed the data. The scans showed clear evidence of genetic adaptation, of human DNA actively responding to and surviving conditions that should have killed them. One of the younger scientists looked up at Walker, his perfect features showing an emotion that looked almost like fear. "Your DNA, it's still changing, still adapting." "How?" Walker thought of the children in the colony, many of whom had shown even stronger radiation resistance than the adults. Born into this harsh environment, their bodies had adapted from their first cell division. "You engineered yourselves to be perfect," Walker said. "We engineered ourselves to keep improving." Above them, through the colony's reinforced windows, the star that should have killed them shone bright and harsh. But now it illuminated something the collective had never expected to see. Humans who were stronger than they'd ever imagined possible. The grand assembly hall of the collective's main ship gleamed with metallic perfection. Dr. Walker stood before the gathered alien council, no longer feeling small despite being surrounded by their towering forms. 6 months had passed since the solar storm, and today everything would change. The High Commander stood at the center podium, his perfect features arranged in an expression of smug certainty. "We have gathered today to officially announce our decision regarding humanity's status," he began. "Despite their determined efforts, the human colonies have clearly demonstrated the limitations of their species." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled aliens. They had watched humans struggle with gravity, cold, and toxic air. Surely, they thought, this primitive species would now accept their proper place as a protected race. Walker stepped forward when called upon, carrying a simple data pad. "Before you make your final decision," he said, "I would like to present our results." The High Commander nodded graciously, clearly expecting the admission of defeat. Instead, Walker activated the main display screen, showing side-by-side genetic scans. "These are human baseline genes," he said, indicating the first image. "And these," he continued, "are scans from our colonists taken yesterday." The room fell silent. Even to their engineered minds, the differences were obvious. The colonial DNA showed clear signs of beneficial mutations, adaptations that shouldn't have been possible in such a short time. "Impossible," one of the council members said. "This must be falsified data." Walker smiled. "I thought you might say that." He turned to the entrance. "Please come in." The doors opened, and colonists from each world entered. They moved with fluid grace, their bodies clearly adapted to their new homes. A young woman from the Crusher carried a massive piece of equipment with ease. A man from the Ice World wore only light clothing despite the ship's cold temperature. A family from the Toxic World breathed the unfiltered ship's air without difficulty. But what truly shocked the collective were the children. Born on these harsh worlds, they showed even more dramatic adaptations. Their bodies were living proof of humanity's potential. "You see perfection as an end state," Walker explained to the stunned council, "something to be achieved and maintained. But life itself doesn't work that way. Real perfection is the ability to keep changing, to face new challenges and adapt." The High Commander's perfect face showed confusion for the first time. "But we engineered ourselves to be superior. Our strength, our speed, our durability are impressive," Walker agreed. "But fixed, unchanging. While you were watching us struggle, you missed something important. We weren't just surviving. We were evolving." He showed more data. Bone density measurements from the Crusher that exceeded anything possible on Earth, metabolic adaptations from the Ice World that allowed unprecedented cold resistance, enhanced lung capacity from the Toxic World that let humans process previously poisonous air. "Your own genetic scans show the price of your perfection," Walker continued. "You can't adapt anymore, can't evolve. You've engineered yourselves into an evolutionary dead end." The council erupted in debate. Some demanded verification, others called for immediate action. But a growing number showed something new in their perfect faces: uncertainty. One of the younger council members spoke up. "If what you say is true, then your species could potentially adapt to any environment." Walker nodded. "Given time and generations, yes. Every challenge you give us makes us stronger. Every obstacle forces us to evolve. Your test didn't prove our weakness. It proved our greatest strength." The High Commander stared at the genetic scans, his certainty crumbling. "All this time," he said quietly, "we thought we were testing you. But perhaps we were the ones being tested." Walker looked around the room, at the perfect, unchanging faces of the collective. They had achieved what they thought was the peak of evolution, only to discover that humanity's weakness, our imperfection, our constant change, was actually the path to true advancement. The revelation was clear. The future belonged not to the perfect, but to those who could keep changing, keep adapting, keep evolving. And humanity was just getting started. 1 year after the Grand Assembly, Dr. Walker stood in an observation dome on the Crusher, watching a group of children play in the afternoon sun. Their movements were graceful and strong, born of bodies that had never known Earth's lighter gravity. Beside him stood the High Commander, his perfect form somehow seeming less impressive than it had a year ago. "We were wrong about so many things," the High Commander said, watching the children. "We thought we had reached the peak of evolution. Instead, we had stopped climbing altogether. The changes across the colonies had become impossible to ignore. Third-generation children were being born with even more pronounced adaptations. On the Ice World, infants naturally maintained body temperatures that would have been fatal to their grandparents. In the toxic atmosphere colony, new lung structures had developed that could filter harmful gases naturally. Your scientists have examined our genetic engineering," the High Commander continued. "Can they fix us? Make us adaptable again. Walker shook his head. It's not that simple. Your ancestors made their changes permanent. Trying to undo that could be catastrophic. He paused, looking at the alien leader. But we might be able to find another way. The collective had changed too, though not physically. Their society, once rigid in its certainty of superiority, was experiencing its own kind of evolution. They had begun studying human adaptation with keen interest, looking for ways to combine their engineered perfection with humanity's adaptability. A small group of children ran past them, heading for the playground equipment specially designed for the Crusher's gravity. One of them, a 6-year-old girl, easily lifted herself on bars that would have challenged even the High Commander's engineered strength. Look at her muscle structure, Walker said, showing a scan on his pad. Her body isn't just stronger, it's fundamentally different from baseline humans. More efficient, better adapted to this environment. And her children will likely show even more changes. And you really can't predict what these changes will be. The High Commander asked. That's the beauty of it, Walker replied. Evolution isn't about reaching a final form. It's about becoming whatever you need to be to survive and thrive. News had spread across the galaxy about humanity's achievement. Other species, some who had also engineered themselves into evolutionary dead ends, began seeking Earth's help. The collective, humbled by their discovery, had become humanity's strongest advocates in the galactic community. We're establishing new colonies, Walker said. Different environments, different challenges. Each one will drive new adaptations. In a few generations, humanity might branch into subspecies, each perfectly suited to their new homes. The High Commander looked troubled. Won't that divide your people? Walker smiled. Unity isn't about being identical. It's about celebrating our differences while remembering our common origin. Besides, we'll keep changing. That's what humans do. As if to emphasize his point, a report came in from the newest colony on a low-gravity world. The first children born there were showing signs of longer, more graceful limbs and enhanced spatial awareness, perfect for their environment. 100 years from now, Walker said, humans might exist in forms we can't even imagine today. And that's exactly as it should be. The High Commander watched the children play for a long moment. We thought perfection meant reaching an end state, he said finally. You showed us that true perfection is the ability to keep growing, keep changing. A ship descended through the Crusher's thick atmosphere, more colonists arriving to start new lives. Among them would be scientists from the collective, coming to study human adaptation, hoping to find a way to restore their own species' ability to evolve. What do you think the future holds? The High Commander asked. Walker looked at the children, the colony, and the endless horizon beyond. I don't know, he said with a smile. And that's what makes it perfect. Above them, the Crusher's heavy sun painted the sky in deep purples and reds, a sight that would have been alien to human eyes just a year ago. But to the children playing below, it was simply home. They were the beginning of humanity's next great adventure, not reaching for perfection, but embracing the perfect imperfection of endless change. The end.